Bare and Complete with Lauren Fairchild. 100% acceptance and empowerment for women. Welcome to today's episode of Bare and Complete. I'm Lauren Fairchild. I'm excited to discuss today a topic that has been quite relevant to me in these last couple of weeks. So I really wanted to share it with you as well as my personal experience because I know it is a juicy one. So it's really around the topic of self-worth, self-value, and external validation versus internal validation. So self-worth is not a new term. It's something that has been a term that's been around for quite some time. And it, in its words, in its name of self-worth, that actually gives you clues as to what it's about. So self-worth is all about the worth of yourself, the value of yourself. Now, interestingly, even though it's literally in the name self-worth or the value of you, there is two ways that people commonly get their self-worth. And one way is to actually get your self-worth and know your own self-worth and your own value based on other people or external things. So what that means, for example, is that if I was to rate myself out of 100%, and if I got 100%, that means I'm the most valuable and I have a lot of self-worth. So some people, I did this for decades of my life, pretty much my whole life, until the last few years when I learned more about this work. So I would actually, try and always be at 100% value or 100% self-worth. But I wasn't really totally in control of that number because the most common way that people measure their self-worth or their value is through external. So that means that I have to add value to other people's life. I have to be kind and generous and do things for others so that they see that I'm a good person. And depending on how much they value me or that they see my value, that is where I can fill up and know where I measure on this, track of 100%. So I'm not saying that that is in any way, shape, or form wrong to be kind and generous to people. But the problem when you're doing something like that to measure your own value and self-worth, it's coming from a place of fear. It's coming from a place of unmet needs. So I'm doing something nice to get back and to see my value, to increase my self-worth and the value that I have for myself. So this is how a lot of people live their lives because they don't know any different and they haven't really reflected on where their self-worth is coming from. So it's the most common way that people do measure their self-worth. So the problem with this is that you can, in that scenario, control how you act with other people. And again, it's not just about being kind and generous. It's great if you're kind and generous. So there's nothing actually wrong with that. But if you are subconsciously doing it in order to get value from others or perceived value of yourself from others, then that's where there becomes baggage attached to it. There becomes pressure attached to it. And eventually what happens is you end up burning out. You end up sacrificing your own needs and your own energy because you're always trying to get approval from others. And in that situation of that scenario, I can only control my actions towards the external people. So, how much I do for them, how generous I am, how kind I am, how out of my own way I go to support them. But really, I can't control how much value they place on that. So, for example, in someone's life, the generosity that I give to them may not be anything that's important to them at that point in their life. Maybe I can't give them enough or be as valuable to them as I want to be in order to fill up my 100% value that I'm trying to always uphold every day. So I can't control how other people feel about me. I can't control what's going on in their lives. And I can't control what their opinions are of me or how much value they place on me. So if I'm constantly trying to fill up my self-worth from external sources every single day, trying to get to 100%, stay at 100% from others, then when that starts going down to 90% or 80% or 70%, the only way I can, in that scenario, increase it back to 100% is to give more to others, is to be more generous, to be more kind, to sacrifice my own needs even more to help others, and be what they need to be what they need me to be. And then again, I might get back to 100%. What a relief. But then, again, depending on what's going on in the other people's lives, I'm not their responsibility. So they might have other things on and I'm not doing enough. So my value, my perceived value might even come lower and lower and lower. And again, the cycle continues where I have to sacrifice more of my own energy and my own needs for others. Now, again, I do not want this to be confused with actually saying that you shouldn't do things for other people. Absolutely, you should. But if you're doing it at the sacrifice of your own energy or to have unmet needs of your own self-worth and try and understand that you're doing those things really just to fill up your value cup to that 100%, then that is where burnout happens, exhaustion happens. And also a lot of reprogramming and patterning is happening in your system as well, that you're only as good as what other people see you as. So a really pivotal point, turning point for me was when someone who I was working with, I was a client of theirs, and they asked me the question, what if there was no human left in the world? What if whatever had happened and you were the only person left in the whole entire world? Would you be valuable? Or would you have self-worth? How would you know how valuable you are? And that question really stumped me. It really did. Because I was thinking, okay, well, if I was the only person left, how would I know if I was valuable? How would I know my own worth? And I was thinking, because I would, and then I froze. I literally couldn't. I was thinking, okay, well, I could help them. Oh, there's no one there to help. What could I do? And when there was no one else in this imaginary world, in this scenario, if there was no one else in the world, I really could not answer the question, how did I know how valuable I was? And, after this episode, I invite you to ask yourself that question and see if you can answer it. Because for me, I literally couldn't, and every answer, every solution I tried to say, how would I know my own value or my self-worth if I was the only human alive left? I could not answer it. So that is a really big signal that there's something fundamentally misaligned in my own system. Because that common way of getting self-worth and knowing your value from external people always means that you're incomplete, always means that you're trying to find externally your value and your self-worth. So the second way that people get their self-worth is the newer version that I've personally been doing these last few years. And that way is to actually get your self-worth internally from yourself, from within you. And when you do that, it is an immediate shift because you know that if you are upholding the values that you have as a person, that is actually giving you your self-worth and your value. But you don't need anyone's approval or recognition to be doing that. And that's the difference. So for me, getting my self-worth and value internally, I'm actually genuinely, majority of the time, doing the same actions. So for me, a value is to be kind and to be generous to people around me and to help others. I love doing that. I get a buzz out of it. It energizes me if I'm doing it from the right place. So for me to get my self-worth and self-value from internally, it's about saying, okay, Lauren, have I been as kind as I can today to everybody? Not based on how they have felt or for them to reflect back to me, but for me to know within myself, yes, I'm proud of myself for the kind things that I did today. And, I might reflect on another thing. Have I been generous today? Or have I been generous this last week? And I'd reflect back and say, yes, great. I don't need the people who I've been kind or generous to acknowledge or recognize me if I'm doing it from internally. But when you're doing it in the first way, where you're being kind and generous for them to reflect back how valuable you are, and you're trying to get them to fill up your cup to the 100% value, that is when it becomes this kind of desperation and burning out and sacrificing your own self for them. In the second version, you're doing the same thing, ultimately, being kind and generous. And honestly, when you do it from internally, you have more abundance and more energy to be able to be more kind and be more generous, because you're not doing it to get something back in return. You're doing it because that makes you feel good about yourself, your own self-worth and your own value. It's like if you're driving in the car. This is a great example. So if you're driving in the car and you let someone in, when you're driving and you let someone in, and if they don't wave and thank you, a lot of people get really annoyed, right? They're like, oh, why did I let them in? They didn't even thank me. I let them in and they ignored me and they took it for granted and they pushed in. And this is a really great example of doing something to get the reward or the value from the other person. So you're trying to get external validation. You're letting that person in and they didn't thank you. So you didn't get the recognition of, hey, you're a good person, thanks. Up your value a couple of percent in your cup because you let me in. So if you let someone in just for the sake of being kind and generous and letting that person in, but you're getting your self-worth and value internally, then if they don't wave to you, thank you, or acknowledge that you let them in the car, it actually has no impact on your emotional state whatsoever, because you haven't let them in to get value or to feel valuable or to get something back in return. So you can see in those two distinct sides that whatever you're doing, if you're doing it to get something back from that person, that's external validation. You're trying to get recognition and approval for your actions. If you're doing it just for your internal self-worth and values and internal validation, you're doing it just because you want to, and it doesn't matter if they thank you or not. So there is a difference, and it's like doing the same action but trying to get to fill up your cup in a different way. So your self-worth cup does want to be filled up to 100%, but you can either do it whilst looking for external validation, so doing things and trying for other people to tell you how important you are, how much self-worth you should have, how much value you have, or you can do it internally and just act the way you want to act, that's aligned to your true self and your true values. You fill up your cup yourself. You have 100% of your cup full. And when you do it the first way, you lose energy. You give your power to the other people. Because if you're depending on your value to them, you become desperate to fill your cup up. And it's not a guarantee. When you do it internally, you're controlling the whole scenario. You're controlling how full your cup is. And this is not about being a perfect person by any means. But this is actually a really important way to protect your energy and your abundance. Because if you're trying to get your self-worth and your value from other people or external things, then that is exhausting because you're continuously on the back foot. And if you do it from internally, then you have this free flow of energy because you already know that you are amazing, that you have your self-worth, that you are so valuable just based on your own self-validation, that you can then be whole and complete when you go out into the world and do things for others from a place of actually wanting to, not having to. That's the key difference. When you're getting external validation or trying to fill up your cup or know your self-worth or value from other people, you are having to do that. You have to fill up your cup. You have to know your self-worth. And if you don't fill up your cup and your cup falls down and you're 100% and then you're 80% and then you're 50% self-worth, that has massive impacts on your mental health, on your emotional state, on how you experience life, on your energy levels, and on the way you actually show up and how you see yourself. So it has massive impacts. And this is why it's so important. Self-worth as a term, it sounds unimportant. And especially in the industry where, so many different buzzwords have come along and so many different things to focus on. But really getting back to the basics of self-worth and value and internal validation versus external validation, this is the gold. And I'll tell you something. I've been doing this work for a few years, and this is one of the first things that I truly learned and truly embodied and truly activated. And recently, for some reason, I lost sight of the importance of this. And not to the degree that I was living before I knew about it, but definitely to a noticeable amount. And it really makes a massive difference. It really does. There's a thing called internal or external locus of control. And what that means really is when you're doing things, when you're doing actions or making decisions, is it from an internal place, like this internal validation, the best interest for me, or is it external locus of control? So is the control outside of my control, outside of my being, with the other person? And this also doesn't just have to be with people and your relationships with other people. This can also be through achievements, through work achievements or sporting achievements or any other goal that you're going for. If you have put, every time you act or make a decision or feel something about that thing that you're either trying to achieve or that friendship or the self-worth or value that you're trying to get, fill up your 100% cup to, if it's externally control, that is always going to burn your energy, drain your energy. It's like a power leak in a cable. You've got holes in your cable, so you're losing energy, and then it becomes depletion, and then it becomes burnout. Because what happens when you're doing that is you're saying to yourself internally, I'm separate. I can't give myself I don't have self-worth on my own. I don't have validation on my own. I don't have value on my own. I need others to mirror it back to me. So then, if that is the case, you're telling your system and your body and your mind that you're not whole. And that's why it's so important for us to really nail this down. Really, really focus on this, even just for a week, and see your life change. Because when you start acting and having self-worth from within and validation from within, that's when you're whole. That's when you're complete. You're not relying on others to make you feel good about yourself. You feel good about yourself because you're being the human that you want to be. Kind, generous, or achieving those things, or they're not adding meaning to you. So there is a tool you can use to really help navigate where you're at. So the first thing I would recommend you do is that question I posed before. If you were the last human on earth, how would you know your self-worth or your value? And really reflect on that and sit with that. And then the second thing to do is to know that your self-worth and value comes from within. So over every day for the next week, just make those decisions for yourself. Recognize, am I doing this behavior because I want to, for me internally, because it makes me feel good no matter what that other person reflects back to me? Or am I doing this task to get their external approval, or to get their recognition, or to get value from them to reflect back to me? Awareness is key here, because once you make those distinctions, once you see this in reality, it's really hard to unsee it. And it becomes a pattern for you to recognize and interrupt. And then know, at the end of the day, reflect and say, my self-worth comes from within. And give that validation to yourself. Get your self-worth and your value from internally in. You have the ability and the power to do that. Be a good person because you want to be a good person. Be kind because you want to be kind. Not because you're going to get something from that person. When you do this, you drop all of these invisible contracts that we have with people about what we're getting from them. But when you don't need anything back from them, that's when you're totally free. That's when you're totally whole. And that's when you're complete. So I'm excited to hear how this goes for you. I'd love to hear your comments once you've tried this out and see how it goes for you. It was life-changing for me, and I'm so excited to be able to share this topic with you because it's so profound. And I know personally how much just focusing on getting your self-worth and value from within is so life-changing and transformative. And I'm excited for you. Thank you so much for joining me in today's episode of Bare and Complete. Subscribe to the channel now. Bare and Complete with Lauren Fairchild. 100% acceptance and empowerment for women.